My name is Carol Whitfield. I was 54 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. It was a 614 Harre area code, Columbus, Ohio. I had no family there. No old friends I could think of. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. Hello? There was a pause, then a woman's voice, young, maybe late 20s or early 30s. She sounded nervous, but also deliberate, like she had rehearsed this. Is this Carol? Carol Whitfield? Yes, I said. Who is this? Another pause. And then she said it. My name is Danielle. I've been seeing your husband for the past 3 years, and I'm calling because I'm pregnant. And I think you deserve to know. I sat there for a moment. I looked at my cold coffee. I looked at the window above the sink, where a bird feeder hung that I'd put up 2 springs ago and my husband had complained about because it attracted squirrels. Congratulations, sweetheart, I said. And I hung up. Then I walked to the hallway closet. On the top shelf, behind a box of old tax returns and a winter hat I hadn't worn in years, was a gray accordion folder secured with a rubber band. Inside were 847 pages, printed emails, bank transfer records, hotel receipts, photographs, notarized affidavits, a private investigator's full report, phone records, and 3 flash drives, each labeled in my handwriting with a date range. I had been recording for 2 years. I set the folder on the kitchen table. Then I called my attorney. His name was Robert Kane. I had hired him quietly 18 months ago through a referral from my oldest friend, Patricia, who was a retired family court judge. Robert was not cheap, but Patricia told me he was the best divorce attorney in Franklin County. And when I told him what I suspected about my husband at the time, he told me something I never forgot. He said, Carol, the difference between a good divorce and a very good divorce is preparation. Don't move until you're ready. So I prepared. I should tell you about my husband. His name is Gerald Whitfield. We had been married for 26 years. We met when I was 28 and he was 32. He was a commercial real estate developer, not a famous one, not a wealthy one yet, but ambitious, driven, the kind of man who always seemed to be on the edge of something bigger. For the first 10 years of our marriage, I believed in that. I believed in him. I had my own career. I was a licensed CPA, working for a mid-size accounting firm. I wasn't famous either. But I was good at my job. Detail-oriented, patient. Gerald used to say I was the most organized person he had ever met in his life. He didn't know how right he was. The first sign that something was wrong came about 5 years ago. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't lipstick on a collar. It was a feeling. That quiet shift in the energy of a house when something is off but you can't name it yet. Gerald started working later, started traveling more, started being vague in a way he never used to be. He used to tell me everything about his deals, every negotiation, every contract, every setback. And then one day he just stopped. I didn't say anything. I watched. About 3 years ago, I started noticing the money. Gerald and I had always had separate professional accounts that was practical. We each had our own income, but our household finances ran through a joint account. Mortgage, utilities, our daughter's college funds, everything. I managed it. I had always managed it. It was, ironically, the one area of our life he was perfectly happy to hand over to me, which meant I saw everything. I started noticing small transfers out of his business account into accounts I didn't recognize. At first they were minor, a few $100s here and there. I assumed it was business-related, petty cash, vendor payments, something mundane. But then they grew, and they became regular, the same amounts on the same dates every month. I didn't confront him. I wrote everything down. By the time I hired Robert Kane, I had 14 months of documented transfers, totaling just over $62,000, all flowing to the same LLC registered in Delaware. an LLC that, when I had a contact quietly run the records, traced back to a property management company in Columbus, Ohio, and a leasing agreement for an apartment on the northeast side of the city. An apartment leased to a woman named Danielle Marsh. I remember the night I confirmed it. I was sitting at this same kitchen table. Gerald was upstairs, already asleep. I had a glass of wine that I didn't drink. I just sat there looking at the documents on my laptop screen. I didn't cry. I'm not sure I even felt what most people would call anger. What I felt was more like clarity, like when you've been trying to read something in bad lighting for a long time, and someone finally turns the lamp on. Everything becomes sharp. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I got into bed next to my husband of 26 years, and I decided I would not move until I was absolutely ready. I spent the next several months doing what I do best. I documented everything. Gerald's real estate holdings were more complicated than they looked from the outside. On paper, he was a moderately successful developer. He owned a commercial property management company, a small residential building in our city, and 2 parcels of land that had been sitting dormant for years. We had a house with a significant mortgage and reasonable savings. Nothing extravagant, nothing suspicious on the surface. But the surface was not the whole picture. With the help of Robert Kane and a forensic accountant, Robert brought in a woman named Dr. Linda Farrow, who I would come to think of as one of the sharpest people I have ever met. We started pulling threads, and the more we pulled, the more unraveled. What we found over those 18 months was that Gerald had been systematically moving money out of our marital estate for years. Not just the transfers to Danielle's apartment. There were payments to a second LLC that owned a commercial property in a nearby suburb, a property that had been refinanced twice, with the proceeds quietly funneled elsewhere. There were business expenses that, when examined closely, had no legitimate business purpose. There were invoices from contractors who, when Dr. Farrow ran their licenses, turned out to be shell companies. In total, by Dr. Farrow's conservative estimate, Gerald had hidden or dissipated somewhere between $300,000 and $450,000 in marital assets over the course of 6 years. I sat across from Robert Kane in his office and listened to that number. He was very methodical, Dr. Farrow said. Small enough amounts, spread across enough time, that without someone specifically looking for this, it would have been very easy to miss. He didn't count on the fact that I'm a CPA, I said. She smiled at me. No, he did not. The private investigator's report confirmed the timeline of the affair. 3 years and 4 months. Gerald had met Danielle at an industry conference in Columbus. She was 29 years old, worked for a commercial real estate firm there, and had been receiving a monthly payment of what amounted to a stipend. Gerald's word for it, apparently, was consulting fees from the Delaware LLC for the entire duration of their relationship. He had been paying for another life. With our money. There was something that landed particularly hard when I read the full pie report. It wasn't the photographs, though those existed and were thorough. It wasn't the hotel receipts or the airline tickets. It was a detail buried near the end of the report. Gerald had told Danielle they would be together once the kids were out of college. Our daughters, Melissa, who was 23 at the time, and Renee, who was 21, had both finished college within the last 2 years. He had been waiting. He had a plan. And his plan had a timeline. Danielle's phone call that morning was, I believe, not exactly what Gerald had intended. I don't think he knew she was going to call me. When I played back the recording I had of his phone, I had been using a legal call recording app on a shared phone plan, fully disclosed on the account. I could hear the moment he found out she had called. His voice went quiet in a way I recognized. The way he went quiet when something had gone wrong with one of his deals. He came home that evening behaving completely normally, kissed me on the cheek, asked what was for dinner, mentioned something about a meeting he had the next day. I watched him across the dinner table and thought, he has no idea. And I thought, good, let him sleep. 3 days later, Gerald was served. Robert had timed it carefully. Gerald was walking out of a meeting at his office building downtown, a building, incidentally, where the lobby security camera footage would later confirm was the same building where he had met Danielle on at least 4 separate occasions over the past 2 years. The process server handed him the envelope. Gerald stood in the lobby and opened it. I know this because the investigator was watching. Gerald called me 40 minutes later. His voice was different from anything I had ever heard from him in 26 years of marriage. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was scared. "Carol, what is this?" "It's a divorce petition," I said. "Your attorney will explain everything. We need to talk about this." "Whatever you've, Carol, there are things you don't understand about our finances, Gerald," I said. "I understand our finances perfectly." I heard him breathe. "I will see you in court," I said. And I hung up. What followed was 7 months of litigation that I will not pretend was easy. Gerald hired a very good attorney, a man named Douglas Firth, who was known in our county for being aggressive and difficult. Douglas Firth's strategy from the beginning was to challenge the forensic accounting, minimize the transfers as legitimate business expenses, and paint me as a bitter, vindictive wife manufacturing a financial conspiracy. He was, I will say, effective at creating noise. But noise is not evidence. We had evidence. Dr. Farrow's forensic accounting report was 112 pages long. She had reconstructed every transfer, every invoice, every LLC transaction with documentation. Gerald's attorneys deposed her for 6 hours over 2 days. She answered every question. She never stumbled. She never hedged. She simply told the truth, with documentation to support every word. Gerald's attorneys tried to argue that the Delaware LLC was a legitimate business vehicle and the payments were contracted services. Dr. Farrow had interviewed 2 of the vendors. One had never heard of Carol Whitfield. The other had been dissolved as a company 3 years before the invoices were dated. There was a moment in the deposition, Robert described it to me afterward, when Douglas Firth went quiet for about 15 seconds after Dr. Farrow laid that out. 15 seconds of silence from a man who was paid $400 an hour to talk. That silence, Robert said, was the moment the case changed. "I want to tell you about my daughters during this time because they are part of this story." Melissa and Renee were devastated. That is the honest word for it. Melissa, the older one, went silent for about 2 weeks after I told her. She barely called. When she did, her voice was flat. I understood. Gerald was her father. The man who had coached her soccer team, who had driven 6 hours to see her graduate, who called her every Sunday. That man was still real. The other version of him, the one I was showing her now, was real too, and the 2 of them had to exist in her head at the same time, and that is a very hard thing. Renee reacted differently. She was angry. Hot, immediate anger that she directed mostly at Gerald and occasionally, in the way that children sometimes do, briefly at me. "Why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't you tell us?" I understood that too. What I did not do was ask them to take sides. I told them the facts because they deserved to know the facts. I told them I loved their father as the man I had believed him to be for 26 years, and that those years were not erased. And then I told them that what he had done was wrong, and that I was not going to pretend otherwise. Renee called me one evening about 4 months into the litigation. It was late. She had been crying. "Mom," she said, "did he know what he was doing? Like, did he actually plan all of this?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the Delaware LLC. I thought about the timeline once the kids are out of college. I thought about 26 years of a man who always had a plan. "Yes," I said. "He knew." She was quiet for a while. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay," I think that was the moment she made peace with it. Not forgiveness, that's its own process, and it takes its own time. but peace with the reality of what had happened. Peace with the fact that her father was someone who had made choices that were deliberate and hurtful and wrong, and that none of it was her fault, and none of it changed how much I loved her. Gerald made one serious attempt to settle outside of court. About 5 months into the litigation, Douglas Firth reached out to Robert with a proposal. Gerald would acknowledge the LLC and the transfers, classify them as poor business decisions rather than intentional dissipation, agree to pay back a portion of the contested amount they offered, $200,000. Split over 5 years, and in exchange, I would drop the claims of fraudulent dissipation, which carried with them the possibility of a punitive enhancement to the asset division. Robert brought it to me. He laid it out neutrally, as he always did, and then he said, "It's your call." I asked him what he thought the likely outcome at trial was. He said, "Based on Dr. Farrow's report and the deposition, I think you have a strong case. The punitive enhancement for dissipation, if the judge grants it, could significantly shift the asset division in your favor, potentially to 70-30 or higher. But litigation is never certain." I asked him what he would do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I would not take this offer." "Neither would I said. We did not take the offer. The trial lasted 4 days. Gerald did not testify well. He was a man who was used to controlling a room, a negotiator, a persuader. But the witness stand is not a negotiation. Douglas Firth coached him as best he could, but Gerald's answers were evasive in ways that read clearly. When he was shown specific transfer records and asked to explain them, he used the phrase, "I'd have to look at the documentation," 11 times. I counted. The judge, an older woman named the Honorable Margaret Tate, who had been on the family court bench for 19 years, had the kind of quiet, absolute attention that I recognized from the very best professionals I had worked with in my career. She missed nothing. She had clearly read Dr. Farrow's report in full. On the 4th day, when closing arguments were finished, Judge Tate asked a single question of Gerald's attorney. She said, "Counsel, can you point me to a single invoice in your exhibit set that corresponds to a verifiable business transaction documented in your client's tax filings?" Douglas Firth paused. "We would need to supplement the record, Your Honor. That is not what I asked," she said. The judgment came down 6 weeks later. Judge Tate found, based on the forensic accounting evidence, that Gerald had engaged in the intentional dissipation and fraudulent concealment of marital assets over a period of approximately 6 years. She applied an enhancement to the asset division accordingly. I received 68% of the marital estate. That included our home, which I chose to keep, the residential building, the 2 parcels of land, a portion of Gerald's business assets liquidated, and a structured settlement for the dissipated funds, payable over 48 months with interest. Gerald received 32%. Robert called me the morning the judgment was delivered. He read me the summary. When he finished, there was a brief silence, and then he said, "Carol, in 22 years of family law, this is one of the cleanest wins I have ever seen. She built the case herself," he said. "I just helped her file it." I want to be honest about what the days after the judgment felt like, because I think people expect a certain kind of triumph in a story like this. And the reality is more complicated. There was satisfaction, I won't deny that. The kind of deep, settled satisfaction of something that has been unjust for a very long time finally being corrected. Gerald had spent years taking from me my money, my trust, my future, and quietly expecting me not to notice. Or maybe expecting that even if I noticed, I wouldn't do anything about it. Maybe he thought I was the woman who would look the other way to preserve the appearance of a marriage. He misjudged me. But mixed in with the satisfaction was something else. Grief. Not for him. I had finished grieving for the marriage long before the judgment came down, somewhere in those quiet months of documenting and waiting, but for the version of my life that could have been. 26 years is a long time to build something with someone, and when it turns out that some of what you built was built on sand, there is a loss in that, even when you win. I let myself feel it. I think that was important. What I know now, what the whole of this taught me, is that I am not the woman I was 26 years ago. I am not even the woman I was 2 years ago, sitting at this kitchen table watching my cold coffee and listening to the phone ring from a number I didn't recognize. I am the woman who did not flinch, who did not react out of panic or pain, who built her case one page at a time, one document at a time, one recorded conversation at a time, and who walked into a courtroom prepared. Gerald and Danielle's child was born 7 months after the judgment. A boy, I understand. I do not know the child's name, and I have no feelings about him. He is an innocent person who had nothing to do with any of this. Gerald has moved to Columbus. Melissa called him on Father's Day. Renee did not. Those are their choices to make, not mine, and I respect them both completely. I still have the bird feeder above the kitchen sink. The squirrels still get into it. I still don't mind. Last spring, I took the 2 parcels of land that came to me in the settlement, land that Gerald had been sitting on for years doing nothing with, and I partnered with a small residential developer to begin a mixed-use project. It breaks ground next fall. When it's done, it will be worth approximately 3 times what I received it for. I will be 60 years old when that project completes. I have a very good attorney, a brilliant forensic accountant, 2 daughters who call me every week, and 847 pages in a gray accordion folder that I have not thrown away. I keep it not out of anger. Anger is a fire that burns the person holding it. I keep it because it reminds me of what I am capable of. It reminds me that patience is not weakness, that quiet is not surrender, that the most powerful thing a woman can do sometimes is simply wait, watch, and be ready. They always think they've won. They're always wrong.